What's referred to as the events of May 68 were responsible for the program of the Pompidou Center. The events of May 68 in Paris involved a series of student demonstrations and student occupation of certain sites. There were times when the students would gather together with certain workers and make a general strike. It actually was happening across France, but it was most intense in Paris. It sometimes involved violent confrontations as the students demonstrated or the workers demonstrated and came into conflict with police or the army, but it also involved artistic ideas about how culture and cultural production and artistic activity could actually bring about social and even political change. One way of focusing it is to consider the activities of an avant-garde art group called the Situationist International. What the Situationists wanted was a way of practicing the city, a way of being in the city, which would divert and change the understanding of the city and of everyday life. An example of some of their production includes a kind of what they called a psychogeographic map of Paris that would be a kind of instructional map of how to practice the city differently. They took a map of Paris that everybody in Paris would have had, a way to navigate the city. It was called the Paris Tauride. And they took certain places, very famous places or well-known places on the map and would cut them out and then rearrange their relationship. As you can see in the photograph here of the poster, they would then mark these connections, reconnect the pieces with little red arrows that they call plaque tournante. A plaque tournante is like a rotating table or like a turntable that would reorient locomotives and trains and things like this. But the idea here is that through this new way of practicing the city, you would take the different moods of different parts of the cities, the different atmospheres, the different sort of attitudes that one experiences as you move through the city, and you would try to reconnect them and reorder them, to detour them, to divert them, and create new attitudes, new experiences of the city. The events of May 68, the student occupation, the student demonstrations, were for the Situationists a kind of paradigm for a new kind of cultural production, for a new way of practicing urban space, new spatial, sort of alternatives of spatial practice. And indeed, the students themselves produced posters, slogans, new forms of art. Here are some examples of the slogans. This one, sous le pave, la plage, that is underneath the pavement, underneath the paving stones is the beach. And this was the idea that if you dug up the cobblestones, if you dug up the paving stones of the street and threw them through the windows of the university, that eventually you would uncover a new territory. You would uncover a beach in the very center of Paris. So it has this idea of uncovering a new place for leisure or performance, but also a beach from which could be launched a kind of new cultural attitude. Or this one, il est interdit d'interdire de dire. You can't do that in English. Yeah, you could do it in English. It is forbidden to forbid bidding. It is forbidden to forbid speech, would be another example. Now, while Paris was the center of this kind of attitude, of course, it happened to other places. In the United States, also around the summer of '68, the demonstrations against the Vietnam War, the demonstrations for civil rights, were very, very similar to the events of May '68 in Paris. London sometimes felt left out as it looked to Paris. The Rolling Stones was inspired to write a song about the events of May called Street Fighting Man, where they lament the fact that the Londoners weren't participating in the way that people of Paris and maybe people in the States were. But there was a general feeling of global change. There was a feeling that out of this moment was emerging simply what would be simply a different way of life, and that cultural practices, art practices, would have to reflect that. The events of May '68 were a paradigm of what the Situationists were calling for, a new way of practicing the city, a new spatial practice. It was as if the posters made by the students would replace the sort of paintings that the Whitney would protect. It was as if the slogans became the poetry of a whole new generation. And the performances, the demonstrations, even the violent ones, became a new kind of performing art, an urban performance that would replace conventional theater. So if the events were not a huge political success, they had nevertheless enormous social and cultural impact.